Hi, I'm Sterling Watts with DailyUnconstitutional.com. I'm going to talk today about why it might be a good idea for you to keep your cash in a shoebox if you have a business that makes frequent large deposits of cash. If you'd like to keep up with us here at DailyUnconstitutional.com, go to the link in the description box right underneath this video and get on our subscription list, and you'll receive regular emails with updates and things that we don't have on the website and offers that may interest you. So please do that. But back to the shoebox. I'm going to talk a little bit about civil forfeiture abuse. And before I describe exactly what that means, if you're not familiar with the term, I'm going to give you a couple of examples of civil forfeiture abuse. These are just two of many examples, but there's not enough time to talk about them all. In Spirit Lake, Iowa, Mrs. Lady's Mexican Food is a restaurant that's been owned and operated for 38 years by a lady named Carole Hinders. And she's always preferred to accept only cash payments in her restaurant, so she has had to make frequent bank deposits just for the sake of security. She didn't really have too much cash on hand. Now one day, about a year ago in August 2013, the IRS stepped in and unexpectedly just seized her entire bank account, just shy of $33,000, and just about put her out of business. It was a clear-cut case of civil forfeiture abuse. We'll talk about the hows and the whys in a minute. In Long Island, there's a company called Bi-County Distributors, and this is a small company owned by two brothers, Mitch and Richard Hirsch, and they've been doing this for 27 years. Their business distributes candy and snacks and small food items to convenience stores in Long Island. A lot of their clients pay cash on delivery, and so that means that they also have to make frequent bank deposits for their own security, and sometimes it's a reasonably large amount of money. Well, one day in May of 2012, federal agents seized their entire business bank account, which contained a balance of about $446,000. Both of these are clear-cut cases of the federal abuse of forfeiture laws. Now, if the term civil forfeiture doesn't mean anything to you, you should start learning about it really fast, especially if you operate any kind of a business that takes in any significant amount of cash and makes cash deposits in the bank totaling several thousands of dollars at a time. You've really got to watch what the IRS is doing, because the IRS is on a mission to find any excuse they can to literally rob you of your hard-earned money, and they can do this by falsely accusing you of criminal activity, or even just suspecting you of criminal activity. Your property can be taken from you in civil forfeiture cases without you even having been charged with a crime. And depending on the situations, they could take your vehicle, they could take your house, they could take large amounts of cash away from you. The worst thing is that because you haven't been charged with a crime, then a civil forfeiture case leaves you without the legal protection that you would have enjoyed if you actually had been arrested. And there don't seem to be any rules to control what the confiscating law enforcement agencies can and do with the cash or property that they steal in civil forfeiture cases. Now, you might reasonably expect that your cash might be put in some kind of a protected escrow account with some hope of getting it back, but that's not the way it works. Confiscating agencies usually just keep what they took from you and they use it as their own, apply it to the fund for their department or whatever, because there's no rule or law to regulate what they can do. And it doesn't matter whether they've taken your cash, your vehicles, your real estate. Once they've taken it under civil forfeiture law, it's out of your hands. Now, if that can be called a rule of law, what it does, it really provides law enforcement agencies with an incentive to falsely seize as much property as they can. And they're doing so. Now, on what basis are they stepping in and seizing bank accounts? Federal law requires now that banks notify federal agencies whenever a cash sum totaling more than $10,000 is made into a bank account. And most people are aware of that. And the reporting of this kind is designed to tip law enforcement agencies off to the possibility that there's illegal business activity. Now, the primary contributor to this kind of a law is the war on drugs, which has contributed to most of the motivation for this kind of law and invasion of privacy. And as invasive as that law is in personal business, you might not have known that your deposits might be under continual scrutiny by the IRS, even if you didn't make deposits over $10,000. If they sum up to amounts close to $10,000 but under $10,000, they may be watching you and they may be suspecting you, and you may be potentially a victim of civil forfeiture abuse. If you happen to be in a business that generates a lot of income on a cash basis, you could be accused of, quote, structuring your deposits by consistently keeping them under $10,000. And there don't seem to be any guidelines for federal agents to use to define what constitutes structuring. Because if you make a series of large deposits of less than $10,000, they might just step in and say, we suspect you of criminal activity, we're taking your cash. Now, in the act of monitoring your perfectly legal activity, depositing cash in various sums into the bank, you've already been scrutinized. In fact, it seems perfectly logical that if you were already aware of the $10,000 tip-off trigger value, that you might very well, for your own good, be attempting to structure your deposits just to avoid being targeted as a possible illegal operation. But you're not. So who wouldn't want to avoid being targeted as an illegal operation, especially if they really are 100% legitimate, which of course the majority of these people are. Now, property owners that find themselves caught up in this forfeiture abuse system, they sometimes spend weeks, months, in many cases years, without having any opportunity to appear before a judge to contest this. And too many of them finally just give up. They never did anything wrong, but it just turns out to be pointless and too expensive to keep fighting. It's interesting to note that in well-documented analyses of federal civil forfeiture cases, it's been shown that 80% of those whose property the government seized were not charged with any crime. So this is no better than legalized theft. So we need to make the federal government accountable, and part of this accountability involves stopping this ridiculous war on drugs. If we're going to stop the abuse of civil forfeiture, clearly we got two choices. We can either totally abolish civil forfeiture, or we can carry it out with some amount of accountability. It seems obvious, considering the 80% statistic that I just cited, that the abuse of property rights could easily be reduced by 80% by making legitimate criminal arrest of every victim a prerequisite to seizing any property. Now, that word legitimate is also a key word, and that's why I lean towards the total abolition of civil forfeiture, because the war on drugs is what it's all about anyway. Most cases of legally valid civil forfeiture revolve around illegal, victimless crimes, drug trade. The legalization of drugs would result in the elimination of a vast part of the underground syndicate. then there would no longer be any grounds to prosecute the greater portion of the remaining 20% of civil forfeiture cases. And then the federal government wouldn't even need to take property away from people anymore, would it? Or did they ever really need to? You know, living under liberty would make life so much simpler. Catch you on the next video.